الله أكبر.
حي على الصلاة.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
حي على الصلاة.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
حي على الصلاة.
الله أكبر.
Islam family, once again, Rashid Ibn highest praise to Allah, the highest of honors to His holy and divine Prophet, Noble Ali, and all things that are Moorish and Asiatic Islam. The concept of God, if God is something that we invoke, if God is something that is an ideal, that is action, if you will, then what is Allah? Alright? Contrary to popular belief, Allah does not mean God. It's a loose interpretation. We want to be exact. We want to exercise the power to define, because if we don't exercise the power to define and be certain in our power to define, we're going to leave ourselves open to define our terms for us, even if for the sake of casualty, if you will. But Allah comes from the Arabic word al and illah. All right, and combination wise, that is Allah. So al and illah together make Allah. But al basically means the, as in al-Rahmani, al-Rahimi, and illah means deity. All right. No, it's out before E. All right. And deity or divine or the divine is like the highest form of nature. That's the closest thing that you can find to what is deity or divine. They'll say nature, or the highest form of nature. All right. And also, tracing our steps back to our people, it also, illah is a derivative of our Canaanite ancestry, Il. And Il, or El, however your dialogue or your tongue is, in the Canaanite canon, or religious canon rather, he is the highest deity. He is equal to Zeus. He is equal to Amun-Ra, to Osiris, so on and so forth. Yes, ma'am.
You were right before it's I.
It is I? Okay. Mm-hmm. I get that confused.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
It's similar. It's along the same lines. But the key is to remember that these are all the same ideal. It says in chapter 10 of our Moorish Holy Quran that man sees the God Allah not the same. Some see him as the Triune Allah. Some see Allah as only one of its attributes. And needless to say, that just because you have another group or culture that decides to acknowledge only an attribute, you can't refute them, because the simple fact is they're acknowledging that there is Allah. And it may be that attribute that is that stands out. One of his, you never know, it may be an attribute that brings about the people. Because more than likely the people are going to be named out for some derivative of their creator. In some shape or form. If you look it up, the name may not be there, but I guarantee it, the history of the people, it traces back to the Most High. And we all know, if you don't know, the breakdown or the overall ideal of this Moorish divine and national movement, of course, is the uplift fallen humanity. But we have to remember that charity starts at home. And we, as Asiatics, born in America, we have to acquire a collective ideal, a collective action. And we have to define ourselves in a way that doesn't trace us directly back to slavery. Because all nations have suffered slavery due to the fact that they have not acknowledged their forefathers in some shape or form. But you don't see them talking about, I'm descendants of slaves. I was the descendant of slaves. You know, I don't want to get too preachy, but it's almost to the point where we just dismiss that connection between us and Africa. Again, taking the good with the bad. We may not like everything that's going on in respects to Africa, the motherland. You know, that is essentially our home. We are descendants of the ancient Moabites who inhabited the northwest and southwestern shores of Africa. But nobody else, they take it in stride. They take it in pride. Because that is who they are. That's where they come from. That holds the key to their survival. How things work. Then that's how we determine how things work. That's how we develop a centralized ideal being born in America of how our ancestors do it. Every other country does that. But going back to the concept of God, all right? So there's a difference between God and great God. And that reason, or that difference, going back to the definition by Moorish Americans, is if a man's ideal is his God, or the great invocation, then Allah is that great ideal. It's that great action. You follow me?
Mm-hmm. He's on.
Yes? I know you got questions.
Not yet.
Not yet? All right. These are philosophies and terminologies that we as a people have a right. We often, people today in the conscious community, we like to say actual facts. Actual facts. Things have to be proven 1,000 times. It has to be done so many times. It has to go through a litmus test and a carbonite test and all of that stuff. For us to say, okay, I'm going to rock with it. Can you honestly say that the history of every other nation is right and exact? Do you think no embellishment came into play at all? We heard about the story of Rome, Romulus and Remus, raised by wolves. You remember the statue, the sculpture? Romulus and Remus. And by the way, the only reason I know this, is because I took art class. Did you know the wolf is actually an older sculpture, and that the Romulus and Remus suckling on the wolf is an add-on? Look it up. It's I forgot my terminologies, the timeline for the types of artwork. I want to say the babies are Hellenistic, as far as the style and the sculpture, and then the wolf itself is a more ancient style of sculpture in that area. But and I can go on and on. When we talk about the beautiful paintings in the Chinese and Japanese culture of the waves and the water, the stuff that we see in the Chinese restaurants, it's dope. I think the creation of the Greeks, I think people are coming out eyeballs, coming out the heads getting cut off and coming out the brain. All of that. And this is true. And what we do is when we take it, they take it and they perpetuate and they build, they build a legacy behind it. They call it comic books. They call it folklore. They call it tall tales. They call it fables. Call it anime, all that stuff. Yes, I'm thinking. but the point that I'm making is that what we're doing here in the Moorish Science Temple of America is we are or define ourselves. And the best way to define ourselves is to give a meaning, a collective meaning to what we consider the Most High, to share that idea of what the Most High invokes, and He invokes love, He invokes peace, He invokes harmony. He is also considered, He's the progenitor of the higher self. We represent the higher self, but when we reach that point in our lives where we submit to the will of Allah, we can understand, or things that we want fully will come into fruition. That is another concept of being a Muslim or Muslim. It'll say submission. And that submission gets a bad rap as far as its definition. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more today, because in order for you to be your best, you have to submit in a certain way. You have to sacrifice. You have to let go of something and let something run its course. If you ever find yourself in a position where you're constantly forcing yourself through the ethers to make things happen, maybe you should, try a form of meditation or a form of silencing yourself in reflection to see in your spirit and in your heart the direction that needs to go, that you need to go. That is a form of submission. And you will find that certain things are a lot easier. Case in point. All right. I like sweets. I like sweets a lot. And when I got off work today, I wanted to get something sweet. I wanted to get a smoothie from Chick-fil-A. I wanted to get a smoothie and a cookie. And I was determined to get that smoothie and that cookie. But guess what? Wouldn't happen. Because every Chick-fil-A, I went to like 2 Chick-fil-A's. I went to 2 Chick-fil-A's and y'all gonna beat me up. So you have to cut this from the camera. I went for 2 Chick-fil-A's and a Mickey D's. Just to get a smoothie and a cookie. And everywhere else it was busy. Traffic was like everywhere. Traffic. The lines that I went to was like wrapped around the building. But interestingly enough, the way home, so I can get ready for temple meeting, was clear. And so after a few dodges and bobs and weaves, I realized I had to submit. It's not meant for me to get my sweets today. Now, I could have been stubborn. I could have waited through traffic. I could have tried to bob and weave. I could have waited and so on and so forth. And then I would have had to call a brother. And then Brother Akil would have had to open the meeting. All because I wanted a smoothie and a cookie. That is actually giving in to your carnal and your lower self. But think about that. Even if I'm using an extreme level, to a certain degree, when we want stuff, we want stuff. That in itself is considered passion. That's the degree of Buddha. And he said passion is the catalyst of suffering, of dukkha, if you will. He said for us to demonstrate passion is almost a selfish act, because everything else flies out the window. We want what we want and that's it. But we have to understand that this situation that we're in is bigger than us. Do we think that we would survive today if each and every blood cell wanted to do their own thing? And we got a lot of blood cells, a lot of white blood cells, a lot of veins and all that stuff. If one of those decide to do their own thing, I'm not going to swim the path of the vein this way, I'm going to go the opposite direction. No, they know their part, and they flow collectively and in order. Another thing we talk about power. And power, simply put, is the demonstration of force. But significantly about power, specifically about power, if we look at everything that demonstrates power, it's as a collective. It's as a collective. When we talk about the terminology of something is powerful, that's because it's a concentrated collective energy force or whatever in that object, and it's going a particular direction. So again, this is another idea This is Allah. Allah is that force. He is that deity, if you will, that is concentrated. He's concentrated by way of us on this plane of manifest. Each and every individual, each and every nationality or group rather, they have their interpretation on how Allah moves on this earth. Or how the Most High moves on this earth. As a collective, even if they say they don't have a shared spiritual relationship, they share that idea of what brought about who they are. Hopefully I said that right. They share it. They may not say, oh, well, I tell you what, I'm going to share something with you. I was looking on, listening to AJ Plus, Al Jazeera Plus, earlier this week. And they were talking about a Persian or an Iraqi brother that he practiced, this was his first year practicing or observing the month of Ramadan.
Oh, I saw this video.
Yeah. And what I found it fascinating because I'm like, how do you not practice? How were you born and raised a Muslim, but this was you like 21, 22 years old, and this is your first year observing Ramadan? But we have to remember that the Western ideology that we have, my prophet calls it European psychology, if you will, but the Western ideology that we have is that culture and religion are separate. When lo and behold, it wasn't the concept of Islam as we know it is a culture to them. That's why it's important to establish what our definition of Islamism is, because the culture helps to promote the progress of the race. It helps us to establish how we want to move and how we want to affect things, and how we want to be represented out there in the world. So this whole time he was, he may not have been a quote-unquote practicing Muslim 5 times a day, so on and so forth, but it was things that was ingrained in his mind that we just take it as the sunnah, or we take it as adab, or fiqh, him walking into a room with his right foot, or walking into the restroom with his left foot. He may not say assalamu alaikum, he may say salamat, just things. But it's in his nature because he was raised in that culture. So for him, he can always just go back to it. For him, it's just a tradition. So the way that he practices Islam is just like Christianity to us, in a sense. Or Christmas, I'm sorry, not Christianity, but Christmas to us. Most of us, if not all of us, have grown up in a household where we do Christmas. Christmas is like the thing. If we don't do Christmas, that means something is wrong. But for some of us that are more conscious now, we may decide that I don't want to do Christmas. And then we talk to our mother, and we talk to our father, or talk to our grandparents, and so on and so forth. And be like, well, mom, dad, granny, grandma, I don't want no presents, I'm not giving any presents. And they're like, what? And it's like, it's tradition. So on and so forth. I'm taking a wild guess, but that's how it was. That's how I'm presuming how it was with the brother, that, he may not have decided or made it known, but I'm pretty sure one day his family members noticed that he wasn't waking up, before dawn, that he was doing more things of a European lifestyle and custom, and also that is contributed to the fact that his parents moved him over here at an early age. So, why am I saying all that? Because regardless of what he decided to practice or how he practices, that culture is ingrained in him, thus it's still a part of him. Even if he doesn't observe it traditionally verbatim, it's still something that's ingrained in him, and more than likely he's going to pass it on to his children, some shape or form. Or they're going to have a remnant of it. So we should be doing the same thing. We should be having a collective ideal as Moorish Americans, as Asiatics is a reason. If you're claiming that you're indigenous to the land, whether it's by way of you being already here or coming from Africa, we should be linking up. Because regardless of what you say, somewhere along the line, our cultures are similar. And that's what the European couldn't understand. He would... Let me tell you about this European. May Allah be pleased with him. This man went everywhere. And when I say everywhere, he went everywhere. Out from Europe, this man just about everywhere. He went this way, that way, down here, over here, through here. He went up here. And I think with the exception of this place, and this, stands to be determined, everywhere he went, he saw some form of a fez. He saw some form of a head wrap. He saw he saw a culture that was very similar to where he had came from before. And they looked like us. They may not have had the proverbial Hamitic features, the wide noses and the full lips. They could have been like the brother Yosef over there that had the thin lips and the long nose. And that's another thing that we need to get out of the habit of, is the facial phenotypes determining whether or not what's European and what's not. But that's what he was saying. He was like, man, everywhere I go, I can't get away from these guys. They're everywhere. They all look different. One wears feathers, and the other one does something else. Got a bone in their nose. But why am I seeing the same triangular structure over here that I'm seeing over here? What gives? And then I'm seeing some mounds that look very similar to over here and over here in China and Japan. What is going on? But I feel, and I'm going to paraphrase the Honorable Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, also by way of the Honorable Neely Fuller. If you were to go, if you as a European were going everywhere around the world, and everywhere around the world you didn't see somebody that looked like you, the first thing you're going to think in your mind is, if they can set sail, if we can set sail and go from land to land and get with other cultures' women, so to speak, what makes you think they can't do the same? And that in itself, whether it's indirectly, it's threatening. I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. I'm so not a conspiracy theorist sometimes. But the ideal is, Noble Drew Ali wanted to establish the concept that we are all family. Any person, male, female, woman, and child, of a melanated hue, woolly to wavy hair, we are related. That's why he gives reference to the Asiatic family. The term Asiatic, I threw this word out a lot. Asiatic. All right. Asiatic comes from the Kabbalistic teachings of Asiya. And Asiya means like the lowest planes or the base planes. All right, you can look that up as well. But what we may consider technically as Kabbalistic or I would just say Kabbalistic is actually that's a general term during that time. So again, it's the mindset that we have about how culture developed and how religion or forms of spiritual practices develop. If we think about it in a very compartmentalized or linear way, when all in all, it was clustered. It was integrated with each other. It influenced. That's why some things with Egypt you're going to see over there in Canaan, in Moab, and vice versa. Certain things that you're going to see in Yemen, you're going to see in Ethiopia. because there's so much in close quarters that you can't help but integrate and take on something. Islam?
Islam.
Hopefully I wasn't everywhere with this, but the point that I was making is that the movement cannot go any further without people sharing a collective idea. There's always going to be a different spin, because just like Allah having 99 plus attributes, we all are going to have our own personal attributes that that stand out. That is going to be by way of thought and that way of action. But the collective idea and the direction that we're going should all be the same. If you have your idea of what the Moorish Science Temple of America is about and it's different from his idea and different from my idea, then we got a problem. Because we all should be moving in the same direction. So instead of us having different ideas, we should be thinking about how is it that we can bring those ideas together and we can just play a part. Islam?
Islam.
So, in this, which I'm going to erase, in these ideals that we have to also remember that Allah also has order. What we may perceive as free and liberal out in nature, to the contrary, demonstrates a better form of order than we do. When we take the seasons and its initial concept and its principles, it's like clockwork. When we look at the birds and the bees, if you will, and the ants, not to sound cliche, they move about in a certain way and they have a rank and file. And if we even look in our Quran of Mecca, Quran of Muhammad, it speaks of the ant and the bee and how they themselves submit their will to Allah and how they are progressive and how they move. Nationality is the order of the day. However, in today's society, the concept of a collectiveness and unity amongst people is almost, as they would say, not promoted as they should. We are in an age where the individuality or the individual is promoted, and it is pressed upon. And again, there's nothing wrong with individuality. There's nothing wrong with being yourself and coming into your own. It even says it in the Moorish Holy Quran, chapter 1, that you have to, if anything, you have to be groomed by Allah, or you have to be groomed by your relationship with yourself. In other words, you have to love yourself, in order for you to come into your full potential. So that's the first thing. We always have to remember that love is at the core of all of our well-being, of all of our prosperity and success and our growth, so on and so forth. It's love. Even if it's harsh love. This is my personal philosophy. This is not the philosophy of the Moorish Science Temple of America, but I do not believe that love itself is an action. I believe that it's a mindset. I believe it's a thought of how you are towards that person. Case in point, If you love your spouses, the fact that you have a certain degree of love for your spouses enable you to do particular things. And it causes you to turn a blind eye to certain things. It causes you to accept certain things of that person as just who they are. That is your mindset towards your loved one. But then when you think about the person that you may despise or you may hate, you act differently towards them. You know, they ask, can I borrow 50 cents? You like, no, can't borrow 50 cents. Yeah, they ask you, you got a penny? No, I don't got no penny. Well, that's a big cup of pennies right there at your cubicle or your desk. We act certain ways. It's a mindset. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this is because, once again, it's important for us to remember to change a people, we have to change the minds. It may sound like, it's propaganda or biased propaganda, but I don't think it's anything biased about wanting the best for your people. The Moorish Science Temple of America provides a solid direction for their people. And, if we were to give it a chance to really build on the foundation, we can see its full potential. We can actualize the full potential, to be honest. And we won't have to, steady be in this cycle of why is it that I can succeed, but my cousins or my next door neighbors can't succeed, or my family, my immediate family, or why is it that they're succeeding and I'm not succeeding? Because it's an ideal of, and it should be, if anything, getting yourself together, and then once you get yourself together, then you help out others. Because again, charity starts at home. But when you just take care of yourself and think that, if they didn't get on the bandwagon, then it's tough luck for them. The question is, have you made a genuine effort to extend your hand? The Moorish Science Temple of America on our nationality card, it gives the hand press, and that represents unity. And a concept of unity is raising our people up. So when we talk about this hand press, we're not just talking about a gesture that we do in formal meetings or in casual meetings amongst other Moorish Americans. This is representing collective. We've all seen, different nonprofit organizations and other organizations that demonstrate a form of hand press or a form of different hands clasping together to form unity, right? It's the same with us. We foster unity. We foster unity amongst each other. But within that form of unity, we have to understand that there's such a thing called rank and file. And nobody wants to hear about rank and file because everybody's grown. Everybody, work hard on their bills, and nobody pays my bills. So if nobody pays my bills, they have no right to tell me what I need to do and how I need to do it and what I need to do it and who I need to do it with, etc., etc. Am I wrong? Does that not sound familiar?
Yes, sir.
Every leader is a follower. Every leader is a follower. And every follower is a leader. To understand, what I mean by that concept is to understand rank and file. I myself, chairman of the Moorish Science Temple of America, I have someone higher that I have to answer to. The brother will be here today. He is our grand governor as well as our grand chief, Sheik Rashid Ibn. He's a Libra like myself, pretty handsome fellow, killer smile, so on and so forth. But he, being the head of this temple and the head of this southeastern region, he has somebody that he answers to. Our Supreme Grand Sheik Rashid Ibn in the holy city of Mecca, noble brother, illustrious speaker, he himself has somebody that he has to answer to. It may not be someone in the flesh, but he still has to adhere to ideals and concepts that make sure to assure on a day-to-day basis that he's in line with the direction of this movement and the direction of the grand body that we're part of. Divine Constitution and bylaws, the lessons of our prophet, Noble Drew Ali. Noble Drew Ali, he is our prophet, right?
It's not.
He had somebody to answer to. It was Allah. You know, and again, so, you know, this idea of having to answer to somebody, you know, it takes a very humble person to recognize that because they are appointed the title of prophet, that they have to humble themselves. That doesn't mean that you demonstrate a form of hubris or a form of arrogance because you have been given this job or this opportunity to lead your people. That comes with a degree of humility. Because now, if you're appointed the prophet of Allah, this supreme being that decided that they wanted to speak to you and only you to get everybody else in order, what's the first thing you got to do? You got to listen. And it may not be, you know, depending on how spiritual or how secular you are, if you will, you know, you may meditate and you may hear a whisper or a voice. You may see a omen or a revelation that happened. You may see the sun, you know, fire white one minute, and the next day, in the next moment, as it's going down, it gets more yellow. But you have to have that ability to listen without any bias and see the message in all things. And know that these messages are coming from on high. And again, this is what goes back to the question is, well, how do you discern between one and the other? Just like I told you, it requires you to submit. It requires you to take the path of submission. At times it's going to be easy, at times it's going to be difficult. But nonetheless, it is definitely a path that is less taken. And you can see that just by the example I led for today. As I was going to those places that I mentioned, that path and that journey was congested, it was clustered. You had it bumper to bumper versus the direction home. That smooth path was the one that was less taken. Islam, are y'all with me?
Islam.
As leaders, we have to understand it is not about what we know. It's not about the station in itself. It's about the wisdom that we get from Allah to lead our people. It is the wisdom that's needed to relate to each and every person that you come across. That's a leader. A leader takes it upon himself to say that I have 7 or 8 different personalities. And I have to get those 7 or 8 plus personalities to trust me. To trust me to go into the direction of Allah. Trust me to know that I've been inspired by the great God Allah to lead my people. And it's difficult. How do we know it's difficult? We know that it's difficult by our records. By the Quran of Mecca, the Quran of Muhammad. Well, we don't. What's very interesting is I've heard recently that the Quran is very redundant. The Quran is, it doesn't really talk about this. It really doesn't talk about that. But on the contrary, it talks about a lot. Specifically, going back to prophets and leaders, the Quran, by way of the angel Gabriel, by way of Allah, constantly confirms the Prophet Muhammad, or the Muhammad's prophet. It encourages him to continue going. It tells him this, about the past prophets and messengers that was before him. Blatantly saying, these problems that you have guiding these stubborn people, oh yeah, Hood had these problems. Lot had these problems. He left them in the dust. That was a joke.
Stop, Sheik.
Moses had that same problem. He couldn't leave them alone for one moment. He saves them from servitude, from slavery, if you will, brings them from a troubled land to a land of prosperity, and he's like, y'all give me one moment, I got to get some further instructions. I'll be right back. Aaron, you're my brother, I trust you. Can you watch over these people for a second? I got to go talk to them. Just for a minute. As soon as he leaves, they get all the gold and all the spoils of war, and they melt it down, and they build a calf. And they say, this is Allah. This is the one that brought us. This is the one that parted the Red Sea. Could you imagine what Moses thought once he came down and saw people like rejoicing over a calf? I had a teacher tell me that one time that he had went home, went to the grocery store. He said his children, they were well mannered. He said that when he crept back home, well, he didn't creep back home. The family didn't notice that he was back home. He said he caught him doing the stanky leg. Could you imagine that? That's how Moses felt. Like, for real, like, really? This is what we do? This is what we do when I'm gone. But going back to the ideal of the leader and trust, we all desire to be leaders. But again, to be a leader, we have to know how to listen. We have to know how to follow. We have to demonstrate to the best of our ability submitting to Allah's will. Because your ideas are not going to be favorable. It's not going to be favorable to the masses. But again, we're dealing with a people that think they're wrong. What man wants to follow another man? What woman wants to follow a man that's not her husband? In certain cases, don't even follow her husband. So, as I yield the floor, and as we take this journey and we talk about order and respecting the cosmic scheme of things and knowing your part and identifying who you are and loving yourself, you will be a leader in your own right. But do you have the patience to listen to your calling? Because when people see your progress, they're going to ask you how you do it. And you can't give them this lofty philosophical answer. You got to first of all tell them that I had to learn how to love myself. I had to learn how to know myself. And in knowing myself, I know that Father God Allah. Thus, I love myself. And I know, and in that point, I strive to pursue what's best for me. And part of pursuing what's best for me is knowing what's best for my people. Islam? So, I was going to go into one of the chapters, but for the sake of time and being honored to have our illustrious Grand Sheik here, servant of Allah, on the first day of Eid.
Mm-hmm. Islam.
Eid Mubarak, everyone.
Kareem, Sheik.
And for those that don't know, Eid means feast. All right? And in the faith of Muhammad, there are many feasts. You have Eid al-Adha, which is the feast of sacrifice, which I'm going to say this and then I'll yield the floor. That is another demonstration of leadership and trust in Allah. Because in Eid al-Adha, you have Abraham that had received the message from Allah to sacrifice his son, Ishmael, in certain cases Isaac, to prove his loyalty. It was a test. And some would think that's a pretty cruel test to sacrifice your son. But we have to understand the art and the science of the sacrifice. What are you taking? Allah's greatest sacrifice is taking a part of him and making us. Again, man was made, not created. So he took a part of himself and made us. That was a sacrifice. A part of you. How many of us on a day-to-day basis, even in the minor sense, take a part of them, whether it be finance, whether it be time, so on and so forth, and say, here you go. Selfless act. But that was the test. That was the ultimate test, because we knew, and you can tell how you tested, because you're tested by the thing that you adore most.
That's right.
And the prophet Abraham, alayhi salam, he adored his son, he adored his families. And just to think, Allah told him that he would have so many seeds that more than the stars.
That's right.
But then the very first or second seed that he had, Allah says, "Well, give him back to me." It's confusing. But who are yourself to be of the faithful and not be tested?
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So when he was about to sacrifice, and this is a demonstration of leadership in one following, master and servant. Because could you imagine as a father having to tell your son, I have to sacrifice you in the name of Allah? What would you say to your son? How would you sit down and talk to your son? We have hard enough time talking to our sons and our daughters about certain other things, but saying, just sit down. By the way, I gotta nix you. Why? Because Allah says so. I gotta do what Allah says. But knowing and raising your son, I want to take a scene from the Black Panther, because I'm a geek like that. T'Challa's father, T'Chaka, said a man who has not prepared his family for death has failed as a father.
That's right.
So knowing that he raised his son right, even though I'm sure it had to be a difficult conversation, his son trusted his father as a leader and was able to submit himself to the will of Allah. Thus was also a demonstration of sacrifice. Because he could have skated out. He could have left in the wee hours of the morning. All right, Father, I see you at 7 o'clock in the morning. But no, he trusted his father. He trusted his father not just as a father, but as a leader of nations. And that's the level of trust that we have to have as a people. Leaders are not supposed to be perfect.
That's right.
All right? Don't get it twisted. Jesus had to wrestle with himself more times than we think. Right, Brother Yosef?
Islam.
But we have to look at, you know what I strive to be? I strive to be genuine. I strive to be perfect as the Spirit of Allah, as perfect can be. But being genuine is very important to me. Because being genuine, that comes with a degree of sincerity. So that means that even if I have to tell you the truth, I care about you enough to know that this is something that you need to know. I'm not going to lie to you. It may hurt, may be a hard pill to swallow, but that's what it is. And it also, for me, Vice versa. You can tell me, oh well, wearing his turban wrong, and I can be, you know, haughty about it and be like, no, this is how I want to wear it. No, it's not how I wear it. It's probably jacked up. But for me to listen and take the time and say, okay, well, you know, let me go back in the mirror and so on and so forth. I told a lot of stories today, Sheik. I told about my
Praise Allah, man.
going to Chick-fil-A and McDonald's, Astaghfirullah.
Okay. Part of the journey.
Oh, exactly, the journey. But you know, I digress. Again, unity is the order of the day. Nationality is the order of the day. Unity, exhibiting power. And again, power is that concentrated force, that collective. And understanding the rank and file, and understanding the order of things. Again, anytime you all see a white blood cell or red blood cell want to go to different direction, you've seen that on YouTube, you let me know. And then we'll go from there. Islam family?
Islam, Sheik.
I haven't heard you say Islam yet.
Yes, you have.
I haven't?
Yes.
Islam.
A lot.
Islam.
So, I'm going to talk to the brother later. Talk to the brother later. It's one word that he should be whispering in the baby's ear when she's born. It's a she, right? He knows what it is. Islam family?
Islam, Sheik.
All right.
Allahu Akbar.
حي على الصلاة
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
حي على الصلاة
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
حي على الصلاة